Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. My name's John Dykes, and this week I'm joined by Chris Sweeney, who has written a book on a Celtic cult icon, Tommy Gravesen. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi Paul, nice to see you. Thanks a lot for having me here.
I'm looking very much forward to hearing your tales of Tommy Gravesen, who obviously, as I've used the word cult, the first question I would ask you is, what is your definition of a cult hero?
Of a cult hero? I think someone who evokes memories, who evokes a very strong feelings, one way or the other. I don't think they always have to be the best player, but yeah, I think someone who evokes that kind of strong, passionate feeling. People have got something to say about them, and I think Tommy is certainly one of those people at Celtic and all of his clubs. I think he's definitely someone you could regard as a cult hero, wherever he's been. Definitely,
and one thing I mentioned to you before we started chatting this evening is that his spirit is alive every time you watch Cy Ferry on Open Goal, because someone invariably has a tale to tell about Tommy Gravesen.
Yeah, well, he's that kind of guy. I think maybe within the football world, I don't think maybe at clubs like Everton and Hamburg and back in Denmark, I don't think people were quite. Social media wasn't around in those days. It was still in its infancy, even when he was at Celtic. So I think a lot of the tales about him aren't so well known. A lot of the things that he did, they are new to most of the public. And I think Simon's been able to sort of unearth a few of them, and seems to be making a good living out of it. So good luck to him. He's the official Tommy Gravesen correspondent, I think.
It definitely is. Now, at the very beginning of your book, there's a short passage, Chris, where you send out almost like an open message to Thomas Gravesen, whereby you say you did it your way, never lose your identity. And I understand that Tommy Gravesen is quite a difficult person to track down and to speak with. It depends on what you want to speak to him about. If you want to go for a coffee or talk to him about something, no problem. There's a small town in Denmark called Vejle. Go there and you hang about, and there's a big sort of a apartment block, the biggest building in the city. It's a very small city, and he lives in the penthouse. So apparently, no problem to go up, have a coffee with him. He'll talk to you about football all day long. But if you're in official capacity, like someone like myself, maybe writing, no way. He doesn't want to see you. He's not interested. Get lost, basically. So it depends on what point you're coming from. He's quite a private person in the sense that I think he doesn't react well to people maybe getting in his business or trying to be in his business. I think he's got a lot of baggage from his career, particularly at Celtic, Real Madrid, that made him that way. And right. So therefore, if you excuse the pun, he's not an open book, and he's quite a hard person to get to. When did the point come to a head where he decided that he wasn't going to communicate through the press? Was that when he signed for Celtic and there was some stories around about him signing about his private life?
I think it was made official at Celtic. A good example is the Scottish Sun ran a front page story on Gravesen's porn star lover, and it was his girlfriend Kira. So I think he was into a baptism of fire there, where he was going to be under the microscope. At Real Madrid, he started to pull back as well, because he was always under the microscope there. I don't think he's ever been massively a fan of it, but I think as the pressure built, and I think he felt people were trying to sort of label him or put things on him, and he just gradually started to cut it back. And by the time he got to Celtic, there was no contact with the media. So in my book, you'll see there's nothing from any Scottish, in a book like this, you would think he would go around the Daily Record, the Sun, the Herald, whatever it may be, and ask the sports reporters, what was your recollections? But none of them have any, because they didn't have any contact with him. They didn't know him. They don't know him. So he definitely kept that separation, particularly towards the end of his career.
Definitely. I mean, there are certain characters, and they're few and far between now, which we'll go on to discuss, Chris, who are what you would probably describe as unconventional in relation to what you would expect of a footballer. And some of them that you've mentioned in your book are the likes of Eric Cantona, George Best, Di Canio, Asprilla. And Gravesen comes into that category, and it's that type of player that seems to attract the attention of the normal, punter, the normal football fan. Why do you think that is?
I think in Thomas's case is that I think really he was just a big kid who got to play football for a living and loved it and enjoyed it, and he really was a fan out there. He wanted to play football, he loved it, he enjoyed it. he wasn't trying to, create an image or, land an ad campaign or, be signed up as the next face of Umbro or Nike or Adidas or whatever it may be. Or, he really was just playing football because he loved it. And his whole life was, I wouldn't say his whole life, maybe that's a bit strong, but his whole kind of, ethos was, live for the moment, don't think about things too much and just enjoy yourself. And in the book, I talked to Alan Stubbs, who was obviously played at Celtic for a good number of years, but was his captain down at Everton for a period of time, and he said he was like the character Big, Tom Hanks. He really was just he was just like a big kid. I mean, he wasn't interested in clothes or, he wasn't a big money guy. He loved cars, but it wasn't maybe. Again, it wasn't in the conventional sense, because he would drive a second-hand Nissan Micra down in Liverpool because he didn't want a nice car in the rain. So he'd buy these kind of old bangers every sort of winter and drive them. And then when the sun came out, he'd be sort of cruising in a nice convertible Porsche or whatever it may be. So he was just really someone who lived for the moment. And I think people like that. I think it's quite nice. See, we all maybe wish we did that, but I think it's very unique that you find someone who generally does that, particularly in something as high stakes as the top level of European football, which you did get to.
As a player, as a character, you think to yourself, this would be a fantastic book. There are some drawbacks in the fact that he wouldn't be involved because, as we've discussed, it's not something he would be interested in participating in. So, from your perspective as an author, how do you approach a project like this? How did you go about it? I know that there's a lot of contributions in there from ex-teammates.
Yeah, well, I mean, initially I did want him involved, and I thought if I could maybe get to him and sort of like explain that I'm not trying to ridicule you or make a fool of you. I know maybe when you take the Cy Ferry podcast, I mean, maybe there's part of Thomas that looks at them and think, are they laughing at me or are they laughing with me? I'm not. I wasn't coming from that point of view. I generally do admire him as a person first, footballer second. So I did approach him, and it was a bit unclear who his agent is. And one agent decided to say that if I offered a fair amount of money, that Thomas would do it. That was something I wasn't really comfortable with, because I didn't really think that he would do it for the money, and it's not really what a book like this is about. He's a very wealthy man. He doesn't need the money. But that guy actually seemed to be talking rubbish when I finally did get to someone close to him. His closest advisor is a guy called John Sieverbeck, who used to play for Manchester United, Monaco. He was in that 1992 team, the Denmark team that won the European Championships, and he was a former teammate of Thomas when Thomas was a sort of young guy back in his hometown Vila. So he's his kind of agent, so he was my kind of go-between. So he made it pretty clear, no, there's nobody who'll be interested in this, forget this. And he said I was disrespectful for writing the book as well, which I include in the book, sort of my interaction with John. But from there I just thought, well, if you don't want to be involved, that's fair enough, but I think there's a great story to tell here. And I just approached clubs, footballers. I work in the media myself, so any contacts I could get. I just tried to basically go about it, just contact people that were around him, looking at different stages of his career, and most of it, I got a decent response. Some people weren't as forthcoming, some clubs weren't as forthcoming as others, but particularly Everton were very, very helpful. I mean, I think they were the most helpful club by far. They really did me a few favours and helped me out getting some access. Mm-hmm. But there's also a lot of stuff still online as well. I mean, a lot of match reports and a lot of information out there. So you can sort of piece it all together if you're quite diligent. You check your facts and you speak to different people, and they back things up and all that kind of stuff. So it was a bit of a mix of things, and then sort of bringing it all together.
Definitely. You mentioned there the text you received from his agent saying that you were being disrespectful. I actually felt that in describing his outlandish personality as you described it, I thought you were being very respectful, particularly, Chris, when you'd consider the huge focus at the moment on mental health and football, and some of the terminology that's used to describe someone like Tommy Gravesen, and you quoted some of the terms like screwball, madman, barmy, mental, lunatic, and these kind of descriptive terms are now kind of being outlawed, if you like, within your profession, because obviously within journalism there is a real responsibility to increase the awareness of mental health in top sport and athletes. So I actually felt you were very respectful, because the way you tell the story isn't that he was a lunatic or any of these kinds of things. It's more, as you say, you're describing him as the character out of Big, which I think is a brilliant description. So, I mean, how did it feel when you're getting a text there from someone who's a close aide of Tommy? Did it put you off at all?
No, I think maybe it's sort of, I think probably initially my sort of Glaswegian spirit rose and I thought, I'll show you, mate. It wasn't really, maybe it put me off. And I don't think it didn't put me off, because he hadn't actually seen any of the book at this point. He hadn't actually seen any of my writing, and he still hasn't seen any of it. He's never asked to see it or asked to run it by Thomas or anything like that. So I don't really know what basis he was coming from, because he hadn't seen what I'd written. So how could he say it was disrespectful when he didn't know what I was going to write? And certainly no. I mean, the term, I mean, obviously Mad Dog is the name on the cover, and the reason why I use that is because that was his nickname at Everton. It's not something that I called him, and I'm very aware of what you say. I think you're totally right that the terms that people throw out there are maybe, people need to be a bit more careful. And I think Thomas, maybe that's one reason why he did pull back from the media, and maybe that's why he won't interact so much, because maybe he did get labelled these things, and maybe it did have an effect on him. I don't know, but yeah, I think the people around him maybe are very protective because of that, and maybe a bit too protective. And I think John was a bit overly protective, and I don't really see why he was hostile to me, because all I was trying to do was write a book about his mate, and it's a kind of homage to him, if anything. There's nothing that I would say was critical or what would I say, malicious. I'm not trying to stick the knife in anywhere. I'm just trying to see what happened and sort of let people look at his colourful career and what he did. Absolutely.
It is a celebration, and it's a celebration of this cult, which is something that always interests me, Chris. I mean, I wrote a book about the Quality Street Gang, who in many ways had quite a few cult characters in there. People like George Conley, for example, who didn't fulfil his potential as a Celtic player. And it's something that people are interested in, because I think there's a humanity that people can relate to, maybe of the top class footballers or the elite football, that level. A lot of people can't handle that mentally. And I think that's what draws us to these people, because they're flawed, a lot of them. Cantona was very much a hugely intelligent and massively gifted footballer, but he had a flawed character, and people tend to be drawn and gravitate towards that because they're a bit like you and me. You know what I mean, Chris?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that I felt frustrated for Thomas on his behalf was that I feel like, when you maybe take someone like Paul Gascoigne or George Best, maybe alcohol and their lifestyles obviously had a massive impact in their career, maybe not going the way it could have gone. But I feel with Thomas, it wasn't actually him. It was the kind of system around him, and maybe how football's become very sanitised, and we've got academies and managers expect maybe people to be a certain way, or not say anything and just shut up and listen to me and I'm telling you what to do. And I'm talking about Fabio Capello in particular there, but maybe Gordon Strachan as well at Celtic. I feel as though the modern football world wasn't kind to him. There was no flexibility for someone like him to fit in, and ultimately that's why he retired at age 32. When he could have certainly played on if he'd wanted to. He was a very fit guy at Celtic. That was his last season at his final club, and from all accounts, he was very fit, very sharp. There was no need to retire, but at age 32, he disappeared and wasn't seen again for 3 or 4 years when he appears in Las Vegas.
That's right. And I mean, you mentioned the academies there as well, Chris. And again, the word sanitised that you used is perfect for what we are now getting. The sanitised athletes, the kind of mechanics of the youth player coming through. Do you think Tommy might be a very obvious question, but he wouldn't have fitted in with all of that, would he? Really, the academy lifestyle? No,
I don't think he would have ever got through an academy. I think that nowadays, I mean, I'm no expert in academies, but from what I understand, they're signing loads and loads of young players at the age of 8, 9, 10, and I think Celtic have their own school where they go to school, and it's a whole thing. It's all investment. So no, I think someone like Thomas needed a bit more one-to-one, a wee bit more of a nuanced thing about him, someone to understand him, someone to get through to him and see that talent in him and bring it out, because he certainly had that talent, and he had that back in Weiler where he's from. There's a chap called Ole Fritzen, who's now passed away, and there's a picture of him in the book, and he's essentially Thomas's mentor. He was the one that sort of got hold of him, and he didn't let him do what he wanted, but he gave him a bit of a bit of latitude to be the person he was, but also to try and conform and try and realise you've got to be professional at certain times. There's certain things you've got to do, but we're not all robots. And I think as he went on in his career, it's ironic. As he went to bigger clubs, Celtic, Real Madrid, that didn't seem to be the attitude. It seemed to be the opposite. And I think that was probably the major reason why he left football at such a young age.
When you're speaking about Viola and his youth career, that's interesting to someone like myself. I had very little knowledge of his career probably prior to signing for Everton. So he's playing at a club there, and it became pretty evident that they had a lot of good youth players. You described the comparison, around about the 1990s when Alex Ferguson had Fergie's fledglings, the class of 92 and this kind of thing. They had a lot of good players with Tommy's first club. Did he almost outgrow that club? Because they're quite a provincial club, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there was also another chap that's involved called Ulrich Lefebvre, who was another Danish player who played in Germany in the 70s and was quite successful with Mönchengladbach. I think he won the Bundesliga once or twice, but quite a good career. But he came back to be a maths teacher, and Tommy was in his class. And then he got sort of moved into the youth system at Viola, and he was Tommy's coach. And then when he got promoted to the first team, he was assistant manager. So he had someone with him all the way, sort of thing, overlooking him. And they all came through. I think there was 6 players from that youth team came through to play in Viola's first team. And Viola's a very small provincial club. And the second season that Thomas was in the first team, they finished second in the league, which is something they've not managed to do since. So that just shows how good they were. So they were a bit like Fergie's fledglings, that sort of stuff, that sort of, all together, young team swashbuckling. And he was the star, yeah. I mean, he was the one. There's a quote in his book where someone says, we knew, one of his teammates says, I knew he was going to outgrow us. He just was too good. And you think he moves to Hamburg, which is a big team, and that's only after 2 years of professional football, which is not a lot considering, Denmark's not exactly a football hotbed. To play 2 years professional football, go straight to Hamburg and be in the first team. That's no mean feat.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm looking back at the 90s, Chris, myself. I recall the 92 European Championship win, hugely unlikely win. They weren't even meant to be there. But then what you start to notice is the British clubs start, importing Danish players over, and we've had, Schmeichel. John Jensen, I think, signed for Arsenal from that side. And then later on, we're looking at Tommy Gravesen, and we're looking at other players like Brian Laudrup coming over to Scotland. That move as a 21-year-old to go to the Bundesliga, how did that materialise? Was that his performances for Viola? Was it an international kind of platform that was giving him the scouts from Germany, was giving them notice that he was there?
No, because he hadn't actually played for the Denmark senior team at that point. So no, it was all based on his performances for Viola. It was just basically that there was a vibrant young team. They were all playing well, and he was clearly the star. And he was a massive fan of German football, so he'd always he'd read a lot of magazines of the German football magazines, and he liked Hamburg. So that's that's where he wanted to go. They got quite a few million for him. Small club like that, I think it was a pretty easy deal to do. I mean, it's he wanted to step up, and his two mentors, Ollie Fritzen and Ulrich Lefebvre, they pushed him on, and it's a well-worn path because, I mean, is Alan Simonsen, who was the first European Footballer of the Year, he comes from Viola as well. He went, he left there and went there. There's a kind of pathway for them all. Sort of they come up at that club, get a couple of years' experience, and then move on. It's a club with a lot of heart. Maybe a bit like Ajax, maybe a bit like Celtic, maybe a bit like Manchester United. There's a real pride in breeding your own players and then sort of set them off and let them go and conquer the bigger leagues, and that's what Thomas did.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was his strange car fascination or habits, if you like. But what I found quite interesting when he went to Germany is he became obsessed with Audi, and it was all to do with the economy of driving an Audi, which this crops up throughout the book, almost as though he becomes obsessed with certain things. So it was an Audi car, and then later on it was playing pool, and he becomes obsessed with it. Did you notice when you were doing your research that he had a kind of obsessive nature?
Yeah, I think it was something that I didn't really, something when you sort of step back and, you can't see the forest for the trees sort of thing. I didn't initially, then I sort of think, this is a reoccurring theme. And then I was talking to David Weir, who was, another sort of, teammate down at Everton, and he brought it up and he said he was like that. He said if he was into something, he would just go on and on about it, or he'd be right into it, and he would really, really practice. And he'd become good at it. It was Call of Duty. By the time he came to Celtic, it was right into Call of Duty, and he was right into pool. And yeah, the car thing. I think he's trying to get Aidan McGeady to buy this Audi with him, so they can go to training and share the cost of buying this car. Although they're both multi-millionaires, and God knows why they need to share a car. There's no need to. They both get cars of their own. I'm sure they both get many cars. So but Thomas is on this idea that it'd be great if we bought this diesel Audi, because that'll change our lives. So what is the point? But yeah, he has an obsessive nature, and I think that's also one reason why he's good at football, because he practiced a lot. I mean, I think sometimes a lot of the stories that are said about him now kind of gloss over that as though he was a kind of joker, but he was a really good footballer. I mean, they all say that, and I think that's probably another part of his obsessive nature would be he'd practice a lot. When he goes to Hamburg, the manager's had enough of him, and there's a point where he sort of banishes him for a short period of time, because he tells him, look, I want to talk tactics, and Thomas just doesn't come into the training field. He just stays out there sort of playing sort of practicing free kicks, and just ignores them. And it's I suppose it's funny, it's a bit interesting, but it does speak to his character. He was just a bit different from from what you expect of a footballer.
Yeah, and you described it. You said, Thomas Gravesen saw things differently. So when everybody else is going back for the briefing, he's still out there kicking balls and practicing. It is an obsessive kind of nature, but I think to get to the top of your game, it's a good thing in terms of training and practice. One of the things you mentioned there as well, Chris, which I found astonishing, was later on when he signs for Everton, and one of his teammates actually, and he included Wayne Rooney in this, he thought that Gravesen was the most talented player he had played alongside.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was quite a common thing that I came across. I mean, Archie Knox and Walter Smith brought him to Everton, so I had quite a good chat with Archie, which is in the book, and he said he was a fantastic footballer. I mean, there was certainly no lack of ability. And Mark Wilson, the Celtic right back, I also spoke to him about Thomas, and he said that the thing that struck him was he could almost just turn it on at a drop of a hat. In training, he could just do things like, he could maybe messing around, but he could just snap in to take it seriously. The skill was there. He had the ability. It was just sometimes trying to draw it out of him or put him in a position that he could show it. And there was various factors throughout his career that maybe didn't allow that to happen. At Everton, it was partly because Wayne Rooney's emergence. But when Wayne Rooney leaves, Everton become a lot better. And who's the main man? It's Thomas Gravesen. Not that I'm not saying he's better than Wayne Rooney, but I'm saying, he had more of an effect on that team than Wayne Rooney did.
I mean, when you look at that Everton side, it was in a time of transition, because I think they were cutting back and kind of downsizing, if you like, when the rest of the league are splashing out tens of millions on players. And Everton, under Walter Smith and Archie Knox, as you mentioned there, they really were stripping back. But when you look at some of the players that were in and around Goodison at that time, Duncan Ferguson, Paul Gascoigne, but Knox describes Gravesen as a total one-off. So he must have been, I mean, when you put him in the same bracket as Gascoigne and Duncan Ferguson, who obviously had their own issues, was it at Everton that he truly came into his own? I mean, that's where he started getting called Tommy. That's where he was given the moniker Mad Dog, and he was a total fan's favourite, wasn't he? Was that the best football of his career, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that Archie Knox and Walter Smith were key, because maybe it's the older generation, maybe, I don't know, maybe they've seen it a lot, but I think they knew how to handle him. And Archie just said that, there's a kind of point where you just thought it's a waste of time trying to get him to stick to a position or talk tactics to him, because he's not taking it in. He said the ball is an attraction to him. He wants to play with the ball all the time. So we just used to say to him, or I'm paraphrasing, he said, just go and wreak havoc, whether it's for us or against us, just go and do it. And he said most times it was for us. And the beneficiary of that really was Davy Moyes, because Davy Moyes comes in, a few years later, and he gets Everton up to fourth twice, and they actually qualify for the Champions League in Thomas's final season when he gets to move to Real Madrid in the January. But the win percentage with him is much higher than without him. So he really got that team up there. They managed to hold on, got into the Champions League, but Thomas was obviously at Real Madrid. But if you think now, a team like Everton breaking into the top four, I mean, even with the money they're spending now, they're not getting close to it. So to do it then was, with the very limited budget they had, was pretty impressive. And I think it shows maybe the impact he did have when he was able to show his best and have a thing around him. But every player, manager, person I spoke to instantly had a story or a thought of him. There was no black or white. It was, Thomas Gravesen, multicolour, just bang. Yeah, he left an impact wherever he went.
One of the things that I found interesting was that his girlfriend came over to play for the Everton ladies, and they used to train together. What did you find out about those training sessions?
Yeah, well, she was a footballer from, she also went from Hamburg and then over to Everton, and she, like you said, she played for ladies' side. So after training, Thomas would want, because he's his obsessive nature, he'd want to keep himself sharp. So they'd go in the gym at Belfield, which is the old Everton training complex. They've since moved, but they'd go in the gym and play 1-to-1. And he would go sliding in like it was Patrick Vieira or Roy Keane. He would just clean her out, whack right on the floor, full pelt. And I think the Everton people were thinking, what is this guy doing? But for him, that was it. Just play football, full intensity. And I think in some ways it's actually quite nice, because it showed he was respecting her as an opponent. He wasn't treating her like she was a dafty. And again, that's quite an admirable quality. I think maybe if it was my wife, I wouldn't do that. But in some ways, maybe why not? You're playing a sport. I mean, it's I think that shows innocence of him. He was a big kid. He meant no harm, but he had a good heart, and I think that's a good example of it.
Although Everton were flying high, as you've described, their fantastic achievement under Moyes, the move to Real Madrid would have still come as some kind of surprise, do you think? To go from Everton as a player who might not have had the same kind of style of play as some of the Galacticos who were at Real Madrid at that time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone expected it to happen. And I mean, there's a part in the book where I talk about how there's a rumour that Real Madrid got the wrong guy because his midfield partner was Lee Carsley, who was defensive, and they were both bald. Both kind of white guys, and Lee Carsley's number 26 and Gravesen's number 16, so they feel as though they got the bald guy, the white bald guy with number 6 in his back, but they got the wrong one. So there's that feeling that they wanted a defensive midfielder, which was never him. But he actually goes and plays the role quite well, because he's a pretty good footballer. But yeah, there was a surprise. I mean, Archie Knox talks about phoning him and saying, he phoned him just after he signed the deal, and he said, is that Thomas Gravesen of Real Madrid? And he wrote back saying to Archie, yeah, I can't believe it either. It's like, for him it was just, he was in heaven. I mean, he dreamed of playing football at that level, and to get there, it was just like, yeah, he was a big kid, and, the Real Madrid players, they would all be like going out for training in the snoods and the gloves, and that's one thing he made an impression in Spain, because he'd be out there in the shirt sleeves, the running about, like mad, just enjoying it in the freezing weather. He didn't care. I mean, it was just living his dream. It really was living his dream. That's what he wanted to do.
I remember there was some controversy, for example, when he fell out with Robinho on the training ground, etc. But overall, how did he do over in Spain, Chris?
Well, I think that's one thing that when I'm doing a lot of research for the book, if you go online even now and you punch in worst Real Madrid signings of all time, and Thomas is usually there. And it's totally unfair, because in his 18 months he played, that he was there, he was a first choice virtually for the whole time, played in all the big games. There was a few times new managers came, because he was under 3 managers in that short space of time, but sometimes managers might leave him out for 3 or 4 games, but he'd get back in. So he was able to handle it. I think the problem was he'd started dating a porn star at the time, a famous Danish porn star, and she was with him in Madrid. There became a lot of attention on him, and I think that didn't really help him. That wasn't really his bag. Beckham and these guys and Figo and Zidane, they're used to being followed around and, getting pictures of him, but he wasn't used to that. And, there was Danish press a bit just on Thomas Gravesen watch. There was people stationed in Denmark, from Denmark, sent to Madrid just to follow him wherever he went, take pictures of him, whatever he was doing. So he became, I think socially it became quite difficult for him to, he became a bit caged in, if you know what I mean.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I remember when Celtic signed Gravesen. I mean, he is the epitome of what a marquee signing would be, Chris. I mean, obviously, Celtic are working within completely different confines from any of his previous clubs in England or even Germany. And to sign a player like Gravesen, I think the quoted wages at the time was something like 40 grand a week. Is that right?
Yeah, he was the highest paid player in Scotland. So he was on 40 grand a week over a 3-year contract with a £1 million sort of bonus for seeing out the contract. So it was essentially $7 million over 3 years. So he was by far the highest paid player in Scotland.
And you look at some of the qualities in his game, when you look at the fact that he was a 100% player, that's something that was quoted in the book. He always gives 100%. And he obviously had the outstanding kind of personality, which I think in Scottish football can fare you pretty well if you've got the personality to go with the ability. And, you know, he was somebody that if you've got that kind of attitude to show 100% at all times, it's almost like a match made in heaven. You know, if Celtic sign this guy who has been playing football in Madrid and he comes over, I remember the excitement amongst the Celtic fans. Where did it all go wrong? Because, you know, you never look back on Gravesen and say he was a bad player. It just didn't work out at Celtic Park. Now, you've spoken to some of his ex-teammates, as you say, Mark Wilson. Where did it all go wrong for him at Celtic? Because at the time, you kind of got the sense this was a brilliant signing for Celtic.
Absolutely. I think the short answer is where did it go wrong was Gordon Strachan. I think him and Gordon Strachan was just never going to be a meeting of minds there. And I don't understand why he was signed, because if they were wanting to have the team the way it was and play a very rigid formation and have certain things instilled, he was never going to be that guy. That was just never going to happen, and it was very clear through all his career. And I'm sure Gordon Strachan's he's definitely got a lot better contacts in the game than I do, so it would have been easier for him to find that out if he didn't already know that. But I'm 100% sure he would have. So I don't really understand why Celtic paid that money to then try to fit a square peg in a round hole, if that's right. He was never going to respond to that, stay in that part of the field, don't move from there, do that, you've got to run back. That was never going to work for him. And I think at the end of the book, I speak to fans from all his clubs, and I think you're right. There is a mystification among the Celtic fans. Everyone I spoke to, they would say, "Oh, you know, he was a good guy, and he scored twice against Rangers, and yeah, but it didn't really work out, and I'm not really sure what happened there, and yeah, why was that? And we're a bit disappointed." And I think him and Gordon Strachan, it was just never going to work. And I think it was shades of with Aidan McGeady. You know how Aidan McGeady and Gordon Strachan weren't quite, you know, on the same page. And maybe he tolerated Aidan McGeady a bit more, or Aidan McGeady had a bit more fan support, so maybe that was it, I don't know, but it was a similar thing. He was just never going to be part of that. But he wasn't disruptive with the group. They all say he was a lovely guy. You know, I mean, I think Simon Ferry tells the story as well that he, you know, he's bombed out the first team, but the reserves go over to Donegal to play a kind of, you know, a sort of part-time Irish team, and he wants to go and play. You know, and then you're thinking, a year ago you were playing for Real Madrid in the Champions League. I mean, how could you think this is? And he's dying to go, and he thinks this is great, running about there and sliding into tackles and enjoying it. And you feel kind of sorry for him in a way, like, you know, surely he was. How could you? He was definitely good enough to play for Celtic. I mean, I think at that time there was Evander Snow, there was Paul Hartley, Stephen Pearson. I mean, all good professionals, but I don't think any of them would ever say they were as good as him or reach that level. And yeah, I think Gordon Strachan maybe just didn't know what to do with them, or didn't want to be told what to do with them, and couldn't control them, and you know, it just sort of got rid of him. I think that was really it, you know.
No, it is a shame when you look at it, because he had a lot of these qualities, Chris, as you know, in Scottish football. Often it's the kind of dirty side of the job that needs to be done as well. So you need to, you know, roll the sleeves up against the likes of St Mirren and places like that. And he did well against St Mirren. Actually scored a hat trick. Some memorable European games that he was involved in as well. It's a shame that he wasn't a bigger part of Gordon Strachan's plans and Strachan's team. Even this week, I've been reading stories, one from Paul Hartley in particular, in relation to his antics, almost drowning Stephen Presley, something that quite a few Celtic fans would have wanted to do, I think. But what kind of antics, what kind of stories did you hear about Gravesen? Because these are the anecdotes that, as you say, Simon Ferry feeds off, and you know he's obviously a complete one-off personality, isn't he?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's a few. I mean, I think the one I found really interesting was Mark Wilson approaches him at Celtic, and they're sort of going off for their summer holidays, and he says to him, "All right, Thomas, so you know, where are you off to?" And he says, "Just back home." And he always calls everybody lad. I won't do the accent because I can't do it, but you know, he always calls everybody lad. You know, just going back home, lad. And he says, "All right, you know, what are you going home there for?" "Oh, just into my parents' basement to play Call of Duty." And he goes, what, just for a couple of days? No, the whole break. That's what I like to do. I like to go home into my parents' basement and just play video games. And I think Mark Wilson was sort of like, he says to me, he had a porn star girlfriend, he's a multi-millionaire, and this guy's gone back home to sort of rural Denmark to sit in a basement. You know, that's kind of what he would do. And, you know, even back to his days at Hamburg, he got a fascination for, well, he likes cars, but he got a motorbike because he found it lonely in Hamburg. So what he would do was he would get on his motorbike and he would tear it basically right down the motorway and go back home to Denmark most nights, and then come home in the next come into Germany in the morning, and he would be going 200-300 miles easily, and you know, maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours on the bike each way, until the club realised, no, you can't do that. I mean, what are you playing at, you know? And he would, you know, it's stuff like that, you know. He brought dynamite into training in Hamburg. You know, he said he had some special fireworks, which, you know, turned out to be actual dynamite that he'd brought in. So he left a massive crater in their training field, which, you know, I don't think they were too happy about. He also, in Hamburg, he was keen to sort of reach out, and I think maybe he thought when he went there, I mean, I should sort of maybe try and, you know, become part of the city, you know, assimilate. So on his buzzer in his apartment, he wrote Gravesen HSV. That's the full name of the, you know, so HSV Hamburg. So if anyone was passing, that's where he lives. If you just want to give him a buzz, you know, kind of have a chat about the game. You know, that's the kind of stuff he would do, and you think, you know, he's just like innocent, a big kid. I mean, what footballer nowadays would even tell you their address, never mind, you know, put their name on their buzzer and in the city centre that you can just buzz if you want to have a quick chat about the game.
After leaving his native Denmark for a big money move to Hamburg, and then an even bigger money move to Everton, he reached the pinnacle at Real Madrid. But it would appear that Tommy's career stalled at Celtic Park. Were his performances reignited when he returned to Goodison on loan?
Well, not over the whole season. I mean, he goes there. I think he's probably a bit deflated because Celtic was a bit of a you know, a bad ending, because I mean, there's his last game although he was on loan, his last game as an official Celtic player in the squad was the 2007 Scottish Cup, and he's left sitting in the stand. And I think it's Teddy Bjarnason who, I mean, I had to Google him. I mean, I think he made one appearance for Celtic. He was signed as an Iceland youth player. He's on the bench, and you're thinking, how is this guy on the bench? And someone like Thomas Gravesen is sitting in the stand. A guy that played at Real Madrid 18 months ago. This is absolutely crazy. But so I think it ends in a very bad kind of. It's just not nice for anybody. I mean, it must be embarrassing for him sitting there. I mean, maybe not embarrassing, but just, you know, you must think to yourself, what am I doing here? I mean, this has just been a total disaster. Everton, he goes down there. He's on loan. They've got their own players at this point. Arteta's there. You've got Tim Cahill. You've got Stephen Pienaar. But he does play. And his first game he comes on, swings in a corner, beautiful corner. And, you know, they rescue a point at Bolton. And he plays a few European games, but he picks up a couple of injuries. So it's a kind of stop-start season. The end of the season, you know, they decide to, you know, sort of send him back to Celtic and proceed with their own sort of younger players, because even at that point they've still not got a lot of money because David Moyes is still in charge. You know, they're not exactly flush. So he comes back to Celtic, and like I say, Celtic don't want him, so he goes over to Ireland on a sort of a under-19s youth trip, takes them all to see Batman at the cinema, has a great time over there. And then you know, I think he plays. I think it was 1/2 against Man City. And his career just sort of bows out, and he never plays football again.
It's pretty clear that his relationship with Gordon Strachan was a difficult one. Did this experience have any bearing in Tommy's decision not to pursue his football career further when his time at Celtic Park came to an end?
It's hard to say. I think that he just maybe had enough. I think that maybe the fun had just been knocked out of it for him. You know, I think that he'd just been totally scunnered. And I don't think he was allowed to be himself, and I think that was becoming apparent to him that what had been tolerated, or, you know, people that had understood him. He had Capello, who was like, you know, a school teacher, and then he had Gordon Strachan. So these two guys didn't get him, or didn't appreciate, didn't like what he was about, and I think that he couldn't be himself. And I think he started to feel, who am I? I've kind of lost my identity. You know, he split up with his porn star girlfriend. He was on his own. And I think maybe a bit of soul searching to do, you know. And I think maybe we all think about all the funny things he did, and it was hilarious when he did this or he did that. But there's a person behind there, you know, and I think maybe that's forgotten about in a lot of the hilarity that we hear about him. But he can have left Glasgow a broken man, I think. And, you know, like I said, he reappears, you know, 3-4 years later in Las Vegas, living life again, and it's good to see him back with a smile on his face.
It strikes me as really sad that Tommy Gravesen seemed to fall out of love with the game. And there has been an air of mystique surrounding him since he retired from football. What's Tommy been up to since he left Celtic?
Well, there are a lot of people who will tell you that he's still in Las Vegas, but he has left Las Vegas. He's no longer there. But he did reappear when he was discovered living in a gated village or a sort of gated community that also has Andre Agassi, Nicolas Cage, and Penn Jillette from the famous magic duo, Penn and Teller. So he's living there with a Czech girl who I think was part American. I did have small communications with her, but she wasn't, she wasn't too keen to go into too much detail. But they were never married. But she has a son, but it's not Thomas's son. So he's living there. He's having a great life, and there's this stuff that comes out that he's worth £100 million, which no one's actually. Thomas has never actually said that. It's never actually been proven, but if you go on the internet, and if anyone wants to do it right now on their phone, or just tap it in, and you'll see loads of stories, people telling you that he's worth £100 million, he's got all this money, but they won't tell you where it's from because no one knows. It is a bit strange. He may have it. It's not out of the realms of possibility. She was involved in a bit of real estate. She had links to Warren Buffett. He was the kind of sage of Omaha, this kind of fourth or fifth richest man in the world, whatever he is, and she worked for his company. So she may have shown Thomas a wee bit of the real estate market and how to do it, and this is what you do, and he got into it, or he became good at business. There's also rumours that he's amazing at poker. And in the book, I tell you one account where someone saw him in a very high stakes game, losing $54 million in a game of poker, a one-on-one, one of these like very sort of exclusive games in a Las Vegas casino. And I could see Thomas doing that, to be honest, because I could see him sitting there and losing $54 million and just going home. And he's that kind of guy. You wouldn't put it past him. And all the people I spoke to, I said to all his coaches, managers, players, I said, can you believe what he's doing now? And they said, no, I could totally believe that. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There is one thing that's totally wrong, and Gordon Strachan, I suppose we're bashing Gordon Strachan a bit tonight, but he says on a Simon Ferry interview that Thomas Gravesen became the second best Call of Duty player in the world. That's totally wrong. I don't know where he got that from. That's complete rubbish. Thomas Gravesen was never the second best Call of Duty player in the world. He liked Call of Duty, but I've spoken to people in that world, and no, he's nowhere near the top of that. But I don't know where that came from. That's another rumour. I don't know where that came from. There's a lot of stuff about him because he doesn't say a lot. And in Denmark, he's known as the unicorn because you just don't really know a lot about him. He's a bit of a myth. But anyway, he stayed there for a few years, and then he broke up with his partner, and he came back to live in Denmark, and he bought this huge plot of land, and he was wanting to build this kind of very sort of modern, stunning home. But there was a bit of a problem with the building permits and blah, 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 and it didn't work out. Now he's lumbered with all this land that he can't do anything with, and I mentioned that in the book. But he lives in a penthouse of a tall building in Vila. He does a wee bit of punditry. And yeah, I've been told by people around him, some of his friends, if you really want to meet Thomas Gravesen, you like him so much, you can just hang about the town, and if you see him, if you go up to him politely, then there's a good chance he'll sit and have a coffee with you and chat football or whatever you want to talk about.
This only seems to feed the cult iconic status that Tommy Gravesen has. I've read your book and I would highly recommend it. How can our listeners get a copy?
It's coming out on Friday, February 15th. It's on Amazon, also be in the bookstores. And I hope everyone likes it. I mean, obviously, I know we're talking to probably a Celtic audience here, but but it's not just about Celtic, about his whole career. But there is a good bit about Celtic, and all people enjoy it. It's not too technical. I hope people can sort of go along for the ride with Thomas. I've tried to write it as a bit like a documentary. You're sort of along the ride with him, and you're sort of there and seeing things from his perspective, maybe because it's always portrayed from someone else. Because he'll never say it. He doesn't have social media. If you go on YouTube, you won't hear any vid clips from him speaking English. There's a couple of clips from speaking Danish. That's about it. He is very isolated for a modern person, and I think that's quite interesting, to be honest, and I hope people can get the book and maybe get a bit more of an insight to him and not just see him as this, and I say in inverted commas, crazy guy, because he's a lot more than that.
Chris Sweeney, thank you for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
No, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Fansbet are a new online bookmaker who promise to share 50% of their net profits from tagged accounts for causes that matter the most to fans. The business is about fans and run by match-going supporters, and we at A Celtic State of Mind are delighted to be partnered with them. If having a bet is already part of your match day and something you enjoy doing on football, racing or any sport, then you can download the Fansbet app to sign up. If you do so, then please select Celtic as your club and a Celtic State of Mind, and you'll be making a contribution to keeping your podcast going and supporting other Celtic causes. They've already helped to make a difference to the fan community by contributing to fanzines, supporter trusts, branches with travel costs, and they were also part of the first safe standing installation in England at Shrewsbury Town. You can visit blog.fansbet.com to read more about that on their Giving Back page. All of our podcasts, articles and videos can now be found on intocreative.co.uk. This site encapsulates our love of Celtic, music, books, film, politics and much more. Pay us a visit, check out our shop for merchandise and contribute your working ideas to the site. As always, thank you all for listening. Join us again next week where we will have another guest with a Celtic State of Mind.